It starts with a sound, a sharp intake of breath from 1,000 people at once. Before you go on stage, you learn to live in the silence of the wings, a place that is anything but quiet. It's a world of whispers, the rustle of costume silk, the soft thud of a sandbag being shifted, the crackle of a stage manager's headset. You learn to parse that noise, to filter it, but you can never, ever filter out the sound of the audience. It's the beast in the dark. And when it holds its breath, you know you have it. You either have it by the throat, or it's about to eat you alive. Tonight I had it, and I knew with a cold, clear certainty that settled deep in my bones that the beast was mine. My name is Amara, and this story isn't about revenge. I need you to understand that from the beginning. People will say it is, and maybe it looks that way from the outside. But it was never about tearing someone else down. It was about building something true, in a space filled with beautiful, expensive lies. If you've ever poured your soul into your work, only to have someone else sign their name at the bottom, if you've ever been called difficult for simply being dedicated, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Stick with me, and let me know in the comments if this feels familiar. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. And please, hit that subscribe button, because the story I'm about to tell you is a quiet one, but I promise you, it's loud where it counts. The beginning of the end happened 3 hours before curtain. I was in my dressing room, which sounds far more glamorous than it was. It was less of a room and more of a closet with a mirror and a single naked bulb that hummed with a sound I was sure was slowly driving me mad. I was the understudy, the perpetual second choice. My job was to know every line, every blocking move, every breath of the lead role. Lady Agnes, a fearsome Scottish noblewoman from the 15th century, and to pray I never had to perform it. The lead was Celeste Moreau. If you don't know the name, you've probably seen her face. She was an American actress, the star of a wildly popular streaming series about impossibly attractive vampires in corporate America. She had a legion of followers who hung on her every vapid pronouncement about wellness and crystal energy. The producers had hired her for our play, The Thistle and the Crown, because her name sold tickets. It didn't matter that she was from California, and the character was from Aberdeenshire. It didn't matter that her understanding of Scottish history was apparently gleaned from a single viewing of Braveheart. She had a name, and in the West End, a name is currency. My name, Amara, was not. For 6 months, Celeste had made my life a quiet, meticulously crafted hell. It was artistry of a kind. She never raised her voice, she never confronted me directly. It was all done with the theatrical equivalent of 1,000 paper cuts. My prop sword would be moved just an inch from its mark, making me fumble for it during a transition. A crucial entrance cue would be changed at the last minute, a note I would accidentally not receive, leaving me standing in the wings like a fool, while the stage manager hissed my name into his headset. Rumors, subtle and poisonous, would circulate. I was unfocused during rehearsals. I was struggling with the material. My favorite was the one about me having a drinking problem, a rumor she started after seeing me with a bottle of sparkling water. It was classic gaslighting, designed to erode my confidence and paint me as unprofessional and unreliable, so that if I ever did complain, I would be the one who looked unstable. I was her insurance policy, and she was doing everything in her power to make sure the policy never paid out. Her greatest weapon was her smile, a dazzling camera-ready flash of white that she would deploy right after a particularly nasty piece of sabotage. She'd watch me stumble, then glide over, all feigned concern. "Are you okay, honey? You seem a little lost. Do you need to run the lines again?" It was a performance more convincing than any she gave on stage. But what Celeste didn't know, what no one knew, was that my perceived unprofessionalism was a cover for the most intensely professional work of my life. The character we both played, Lady Agnes, was a historical figure whose power came from her voice, her ability to command men, and turn the tide of politics with a single perfectly chosen word. The script was magnificent, but the soul of the character was in her accent. Not a generic, movie Scots accent, but the specific, notoriously difficult Doric dialect of the Northeast. It's a language as much as an accent, full of unique vocabulary and a musicality that is utterly alien to a modern ear. Celeste's version was a disaster. It was a caricature, a wobbly, insecure brogue that sounded more like a pirate with a head cold. It was the one part of her performance that was universally, if quietly, acknowledged as weak. I had made a decision 2 months into the rehearsal process. I took the meager salary I earned as an understudy, money I should have been using for rent and food, and I hired a dialect coach. A legend, a man who was whispered about in hushed, reverent tones in the green rooms of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was my secret, my gamble. My unfocused look was me mentally running phonetic drills. My struggling with the material was me spending 8 hours a day, not just learning the lines, but learning the soul of the language they were written in. Which brings me to tonight. The night it all came to a head. Ben, the stage manager, a perpetually exhausted man with a heart of gold, and the only person who saw through Celeste's act, slipped a piece of paper under my dressing room door. It was a printout of an article, still warm from the printer. The headline was all I needed to see. Alistair Finch eviscerates the King's Folly for crimes against authenticity. Alistair Finch, the critic. The man whose words could make or break a billion-dollar movie, let alone a West End play. He was a terrifying dinosaur of old-school journalism, a man who valued craft above all else, and he was famously viciously intolerant of laziness. I scanned the review, my heart hammering against my ribs. He didn't just dislike the other play's lead, he dismantled her, piece by piece, focusing with surgical precision on her atrocious and inauthentic accent work. He called it an insult to the audience and an act of profound artistic vandalism. I read the words again. Artistic vandalism. My blood went cold. At the bottom of the page, Ben had scrawled a note in his spidery handwriting. He's in, Amara. House left. Row G. Good luck. He was here. Tonight. The one man in London who would instantly recognize Celeste's accent for the sham it was. And a terrible, thrilling thought sparked in the back of my mind. A thought I barely dared to acknowledge. This was it. This was the moment the universe had been building. All the sabotage, all the rumors, all the lonely hours spent perfecting a sound no one was ever meant to hear. It was all leading to this. The house lights were about to go down on Celeste's career, and I was the only one standing in the wings with a match. The question was, would I have the courage to strike it? The floor of my dressing room suddenly felt like the deck of a ship in a storm. My breath hitched. I sat down hard on the rickety stool, the hum of the light bulb now a roar in my ears. I could hear the muffled din of the audience finding their seats, a low-level beast rumbling before the show. Alistair Finch was out there. He was sitting in row G, sharpening his metaphorical knives, fresh off a kill. He was coming to our show, a show whose lead actress was committing the exact same sin he had just publicly crucified someone else for. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't supposed to happen. My plan, if you could even call it that, was a long game. It was a quiet act of defiance, a personal quest for artistic integrity. I had imagined maybe a producer or the director might one day overhear me warming up and think, she's actually quite good. Or maybe when the show eventually closed, I would have a killer accent reel for my next audition. It was a strategy of quiet competence, of building a skill so undeniable that it would eventually have to be recognized. It was never meant to be a weapon for a single night. My mind started to race, replaying the last 6 months in a dizzying, painful montage. The humiliation was the worst part. It was a constant, low-grade fever of shame. I remembered the first time Celeste really showed her teeth. We were in a technical rehearsal, a notoriously stressful affair where 100 things are going wrong at once. I was on stage, running a scene transition while she was off getting a costume adjustment. My cue to enter was tied to a specific lighting change. The lighting designer called the cue. The stage went from a cool blue to a warm amber, and I walked on. Suddenly, the director's voice boomed through the theater speakers, the voice of God microphone. "Hold! Amara, what are you doing?" I froze, a deer in the literal headlights. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I looked to the wings, and there was Celeste, standing with her arms crossed, a small triumphant smirk on her face. She'd spoken to the director. I found out later from Ben. She'd told him she felt her character needed a longer pause before my entrance, that it felt more organic for her to have the stage alone for another 10 seconds. She'd forgotten to tell me, or the stage manager. In front of the entire cast and crew, the director, who was completely in her thrall, sighed with theatrical weariness. Amara, darling, we talked about this. Stay with us, please. The condescension was thick enough to choke on. My face burned. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I just nodded, whispered, sorry, and retreated back into the shadows of the wings. Celeste glided past me and gave my arm a little pat. It's okay, honey. It's a lot to remember. We'll get you there. Her touch felt like a brand. It wasn't about the work. It was about power. It was about reminding me that I was nothing, a placeholder, and she was the sun around which this entire production revolved. Then there were the whispers. They were harder to pin down, like smoke. I'd walk into the green room and a conversation would die. Cast members who had been friendly would suddenly become distant, their eyes flicking away when I tried to meet their gaze. I found out the source from the head of wardrobe, a lovely older woman named Margaret, who had seen it all and had a finely tuned detector for nonsense. She told me, over a cup of tea, that Celeste had been telling people I was unstable, that I was showing up to rehearsals hungover. She'd point to my constant sipping from a water bottle as proof I was trying to sober up. She framed my intense focus during my private practice as me being checked out and not a team player. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely untethered from reality, that I couldn't even defend myself. To deny it would be to engage with the lie, to give it oxygen. Who would they believe? The dazzling American star, or the no-name understudy who was suddenly, conveniently, being accused of unprofessionalism? It was a checkmate. I was isolated, branded as difficult and unreliable, the two deadliest labels you can have in the theater world. My professional reputation was being systematically dismantled, and I was powerless to stop it. That was when I decided to find Ewan. The despair had almost consumed me. I remember sitting on my tiny balcony, overlooking a perpetually damp London street, the rejection from the cast and crew a physical weight on my shoulders. I was ready to quit, to just walk away and let Celeste have her victory. What was the point of fighting for a job that was actively trying to destroy me? But then, another thought pushed through the gloom. It wasn't about the job. It wasn't about Celeste. It was about Lady Agnes. It was about the play. I loved the character, this fierce, intelligent woman who navigated a brutal world with her wits and her will, and Celeste was butchering her. She was turning this lioness into a kitten, stripping her of her power, her history, and her voice. It was an insult to the art, and that I realized was something I couldn't walk away from. It wasn't about revenge on Celeste. It was about justice for Agnes. The next day, I started asking around. I called old drama school tutors, friends who were working in regional theater. I was looking for a ghost. A man named Ewan McGregor. No, not that one. A dialect coach who specialized in historical Scottish accents. He was supposedly retired, notoriously cantankerous, and ruinously expensive. It took me a week of dead ends before a friend of a friend gave me a number for a pub in Glasgow. I called, my heart pounding. A gruff voice answered. I asked for Ewan. The voice grunted. Who's asking? I gave my name, explained I was an actress in London. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, he's not interested, and hung up. I almost gave up, but I was possessed by the idea. I called back the next day, and the next. On the fourth day, the man sighed and said, fine. He gave me an address in a gritty part of the city. He didn't say Ewan would be there, just that it was an address. It was a gamble. I booked a train ticket with the last of my savings. I walked out of the station and into a city that felt a world away from the polished artifice of the West End. This is the part of the story that no one else knows. This is the foundation on which everything else was built. The address led to a tenement building, the stone dark with age and rain. I climbed 4 flights of stairs that smelled of dust and damp wool. I knocked on a heavy wooden door. It creaked open, and a man stood there who looked like he had been carved out of Scottish granite. He was old, maybe in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair, a face mapped with wrinkles, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was holding a book and a half-empty glass of whiskey. He stared at me for a long moment. You're the London girl. I nodded, unable to speak. His gaze was intimidating, stripping away all pretense. What do you want? He asked, his voice a low rumble, the accent thick and authentic, the very thing I had come seeking. I want to learn the Doric. I said, my voice sounding thin and weak. I want to learn it properly. He snorted, a sound of pure derision. Why? So you can put on a wee show for the Sassenachs? Make a mockery of it? No, I said, finding a sliver of courage, because the character deserves it, because the words have a right to be spoken as they were written. Something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of interest. He looked me up and down again. It'll cost you, he said, more than you have. I know, I replied. I'll pay you what I can when I can. I just need you to teach me. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he stepped back from the door. Well, he grumbled, don't just stand there gawking. You're letting the heat out. That was how it began. Twice a month, for 4 months, I would take the early train to Glasgow. I'd spend the day in his flat, a place crammed from floor to ceiling with books on history, linguistics, and theater. It smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and whiskey. Ewan was a brutal teacher. He did not praise, he did not coddle. He would make me repeat a single word, a word like ken or bra, 100 times, 200 times, until the shape of it felt natural in my mouth, until the sound came from my gut, not my throat. He taught me that an accent wasn't just a collection of sounds. It was a history. It was a culture. It was the landscape baked into the vowel sounds. He made me read poetry, study maps of 15th century Aberdeenshire, learn about the fishing trade, the clan rivalries, the politics. He was teaching me a soul, not a skill. He told me stories of his own time on the stage, of directors who asked him to tone down his natural accent to be more understandable for a London audience. He spoke of authenticity as an act of rebellion. The work was grueling, frustrating, and the most rewarding thing I had ever done. Slowly, painfully, a new voice began to emerge from me. It felt alien, and then, gradually, it started to feel like a second skin. It was Agnes's voice. Strong, rooted, real. Back in London, I lived a double life. In the theater, I was the unfocused understudy, silently enduring Celeste's sabotage. In my tiny flat, I was a scholar, a linguistic detective, building my secret weapon, one vowel sound at a time. My relationship with Celeste became a strange, silent war. She would lay her traps, and I would sidestep them, my mind a million miles away, tracing the cadence of a forgotten language. My calm, my seeming detachment, which she interpreted as weakness, was in fact my greatest strength. I wasn't playing her game anymore. I was playing a much, much longer one. Back in my dressing room, the memory of Ewan's gruff voice echoed in my head. He had said to me during our last session a week ago, "The thing about truth, lass, is that it's quiet. It doesn't need to shout. Lies are loud. Lies are desperate. You just stand there and you speak the truth. The rest is just noise." The beast of the audience rumbled again. A 5-minute call crackled over the tannoy system. 5 minutes. Alistair Finch was out there. Celeste was probably in her lavish dressing room, spraying herself with expensive perfume, completely oblivious to the guillotine hanging over her head. A cold resolve settled over me, displacing the panic. Ewan was right. It wasn't about revenge. I couldn't control what Celeste did. I couldn't control the rumors. I couldn't control the director or the producers, but I could control the work. I had built something real in the shadows, something true. The critic's presence didn't have to be a threat. It could be an opportunity, a chance for the truth to finally, for one night, have its own spotlight. A text message suddenly lit up my phone screen. It was from Ben, the stage manager. It was just one word. Breathe. I took a deep breath, held it, and let it out. The ship had steadied. The storm was still raging, but I had found my footing. I was ready. The secret plan, as I think of it now, was never a single brilliant moment of inspiration. It was a slow, creeping realization, a strategy built out of necessity, and a deep, abiding respect for the craft. It began with that first train ticket to Glasgow, a decision made in desperation that became an act of foresight. I saw the weakness in Celeste's armor. It wasn't a chink, it was a gaping hole. Her entire career was built on image, on a brand cultivated through social media and fluffy interviews. She had no foundation, no technique. She was a beautiful facade, and I knew that eventually a strong wind would come along and blow the whole thing down. I just never imagined I would be the wind. My greatest hidden leverage was Ewan. He was more than a coach. He was my armorer. Our sessions were my forge. I would arrive at his Glasgow flat, exhausted from the train and the constant psychological warfare at the theater, and he would hand me a cup of strong black tea and a book. Never a script, not at first. He'd make me read aloud from the letters of Scottish merchants, from folk tales recorded in the 19th century, from dense academic texts on phonetic drift. He'd say, "You can't speak the words until you understand the world that made them." There was one session I'll never forget. I was struggling with a particular sound, a guttural consonant that doesn't exist in English. I was getting frustrated, my throat was sore, and I was on the verge of tears. I felt foolish, like a child making nonsense noises. I told him I couldn't do it. Ewan, who was sitting in his worn leather armchair, took a slow sip of his whiskey. He didn't look at me. He looked out the window at the gray Glasgow sky. He said, "My grandfather was a fisherman out of Peterhead. When he was a boy, he'd be out on the water in winter, a wind so cold it could crack your bones. The sound of that wind, coming off the North Sea, that's the sound you're looking for. It's not in your throat, lass, it's in your memory. It's in the land." He was teaching me to act from the inside out. He was giving me a gift far more valuable than a perfect accent. He was giving me a methodology, a way of building a character from the earth up. This, I knew, was my real secret weapon. It wasn't just that I could produce a sound Celeste couldn't. It was that I understood why the sound existed. I had a depth of understanding that she, with her superficial approach, could never ever match. This wasn't mimicry, it was embodiment. And I guarded this secret with my life. The cost was immense. I was sinking into debt. I ate pasta with ketchup for dinner. I lied to my parents about how well things were going, painting a rosy picture of my West End debut while I was secretly funneling every spare pound I had into my trips to Scotland. Some might call this a foolish choice, a debatable piece of logic. Why invest so much in a role I might never get to play? Why endure the daily humiliation? Because I had to believe that in the world of theater, a world that purports to care about art, that substance would eventually triumph over style. It was a deeply emotional, perhaps illogical, belief in the fundamental justice of my chosen profession. I was betting on the integrity of the craft itself. My ally network was small but vital. It consisted almost entirely of one person, Ben, the stage manager. Ben was a creature of the theater, a man who lived in the shadows and saw everything. He was in his late 40s, balding, with a permanently weary expression, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He had run shows for 20 years and had a built-in immunity to the kind of manufactured charm Celeste specialized in. He saw her for exactly what she was. He never spoke of it directly. His support was a quiet conspiracy between us. After the incident where Celeste changed my lighting cue, Ben started handing me my own private cue sheet before each rehearsal. He'd slip it into my hand with a quick, almost imperceptible nod. It would have the correct cues, the ones agreed upon by the director and designers, not the Celeste-approved version. He was giving me the tools to navigate her minefield. One time, he left a thermos of excellent coffee outside my dressing room door, with a sticky note that just said, "Sparkling water." Right, it was his way of telling me he knew about the rumors, and that he didn't believe them for a second. His loyalty was a lifeline. In the isolating world Celeste had created for me, Ben's small acts of solidarity were everything. He was my insider, my proof that I wasn't going crazy. Someone else saw it too. He was the anchor of my sanity. There was a specific clause in our equity contracts, something about professional conduct and not undermining a fellow performer. I could have theoretically gone to the union, filed a grievance, but Ben and I both knew how that would play out. It would be my word, the word of a replaceable understudy, against Celeste Moreau, the million-dollar star. The producers would have buried me. They would have painted me as the difficult one, the troublemaker, and my career in London would have been over before it had even begun. Ben's quiet defiance was the only sane way to fight back. He wasn't just a stage manager, he was my co-conspirator. My foresight, my long-term strategy was based on a simple calculation. Celeste was lazy. She had gotten where she was on looks and fame, and she had no work ethic. She believed her own hype. She thought showing up was enough. I saw it in the way she'd scan her lines just before an entrance, in the way her eyes would glaze over during the director's notes. She wasn't building a performance, she was reciting a script. And I knew, with the certainty of a stonemason looking at a poorly built wall, that it was fundamentally unstable. I began to document everything, not for a lawsuit, not to show to the producers, but for myself. I kept a private journal. Every changed cue, every whispered rumor, every condescending remark. It wasn't about gathering evidence for revenge. I keep telling you, it was never about revenge. It was about keeping a record of the truth. It was a way to remind myself that what was happening was real, that I wasn't just being sensitive or dramatic, as Celeste's narrative suggested. The journal was my black box, recording the data from a slow-motion crash. The client relationship asset, in my world, was the character herself. Lady Agnes was my client. I was working for her, in service of her story. Celeste saw Agnes as a vehicle for her own fame. I saw her as a responsibility. This created a fundamental difference in our work. Celeste's performance was all on the surface. She played the anger, the sorrow, the love. But she didn't understand the source of it. She didn't know that the particular cadence of a line was dictated by a lifetime of speaking a language that was closer to Norse than to English. She didn't know that the character's famous stoicism wasn't a lack of feeling, but a cultural trait born from centuries of hardship and resilience. She was singing the melody without hearing the harmony. I knew this was my leverage. The quiet, unshakable power of authentic, deep work. I didn't need to poach clients or steal data. I just needed to be ready. I had built a better product, a superior interpretation of the role, and I was just waiting for the right marketplace to open up. A marketplace with a single, discerning customer. Alistair Finch. My entire secret plan was an exercise in faith. Faith in my own ability, faith in my mentor Ewan, and faith that in the end, quality matters. It's a risky bet to make in a world obsessed with celebrity, but it was the only bet I had. And tonight, the casino was open, the high roller was at the table, and the dealer was about to call my name. The call came not as a crackle over the tannoy, but as a frantic knock on my dressing room door. Amara! Amara, are you decent? It was the director, Julian. His voice was pitched an octave higher than usual, laced with a panic he was failing to conceal. I opened the door. He was sweating, his perfectly coiffed silver hair slightly askew. Ben was standing behind him, his face a mask of professional calm, but I saw in his eyes a flicker of something else. It looked like victory. "It's Celeste," Julian said, wringing his hands. "She has a dreadful migraine. The lights, the stress, she can't possibly go on. You're on, Amara, you're on." A migraine. The oldest trick in the book. It was the actor's emergency exit, the get-out-of-jail-free card for a performance you weren't prepared for. I had no doubt that Celeste had seen the same article I had. She or her agent would have been notified that Alistair Finch was in the house. She knew her accent was a liability. She knew Finch would crucify her. And so she did what she always did. She took the easy way out. She manufactured a crisis and ran for the hills. It was a move of pure, cowardly self-preservation. I just nodded. "Okay, Julian, I'm ready." My voice was steady, a stark contrast to his nervous energy. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had been so conditioned by Celeste's narrative of my unreliability that he seemed genuinely shocked by my composure. "Good," he said, patting my shoulder distractedly. "Good. Just do what we did in rehearsal. Don't try anything new. Stick to the script. Don't try anything new." The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. My entire existence for the past 4 months had been about trying something new, something revolutionary for this part. He had no idea. He saw me as a pale imitation of his star, a photocopy. He was about to find out I was the original manuscript. As I walked towards the stage, my costume rustling around me, I passed Celeste's dressing room. The door was ajar. I could hear her inside, her voice not the weak, pained whisper of someone with a migraine, but a sharp, furious hiss. She was on the phone, presumably with her agent. I just can't. "Did you see what he wrote about Jessica Albright? He'll destroy me. This understudy. She's not even that good. It'll be a disaster. The whole show will get a bad review because of her. It's better if I'm not attached to it tonight." Her panic was a symphony to my ears. It confirmed everything. She wasn't sick. She was scared. She was throwing me to the wolves to save herself, calculating that a bad review for a show starring the understudy was better for her brand than a bad review for a show starring her. She was so arrogant, so self-absorbed, that it never even occurred to her that I might be good, that I might be better. Her contempt for me was so absolute that it had become her fatal blind spot. My first move was stepping out of the wings and into the light. The announcement had been made. Tonight, the role of Lady Agnes will be played by Amara. A disappointed murmur had rippled through the audience. They had paid to see the American TV star. They were getting the no-name. I could feel their skepticism, a tangible wave of disapproval washing over the stage. I stood there, alone in the center of the set, a single spotlight on me. The beast was hungry. My first line was a challenge, thrown at another character, but tonight it was for the audience. It was for Alistair Finch. It was for Celeste, cowering in her dressing room. The line was, "You think you ken this land? You ken nothing." In Celeste's mouth, it was flat. The word ken, an awkward anglicized substitute for no. In my mouth, it was a thunderclap. I didn't just say the word. I spoke it from the place Ewan had taught me to find. From the gut. The ka. The ko was hard. The vowel was short and open. A sound born of a different tongue. It was a sound that was at once alien and utterly, undeniably authentic. I delivered the line not with anger, but with a cold, weary certainty. The voice of a woman who had seen generations of fools try to conquer her home. There was a beat of absolute silence in the theater. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights, the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath. And then a shift, a lean-in. I could feel it. The beast was no longer skeptical. It was intrigued. The silent takeover had begun. The rest of the first act was a blur. I wasn't performing anymore. I was channeling. The dialect, my secret weapon, was the key that unlocked everything else about the character. The way she stood, the way she moved, the way she held her head. It all flowed from the sound of her voice. When Agnes was defiant, the language was sharp, percussive. When she was grieving, the words became softer, the cadences turning into a lament, a keening sound that hung in the air. I was playing a different character from the one the audience had seen for months. Celeste's Agnes was a modern woman in a historical costume. My Agnes was a woman of her time. Fierce, yes, but also grounded, her power rooted in her deep connection to her land and her people, a connection that was embedded in the very DNA of her speech. The other actors on stage were visibly stunned. They had only ever heard me read the lines in my own standard English accent during our brief understudy rehearsals. Now they were in a scene with a completely different person. To their immense credit, they rose to the occasion. They listened. They reacted. The play, which had become a stale recitation, suddenly sparked to life. It became dangerous, unpredictable, and real. I dared a glance towards house left, row G. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but I could imagine him, Alistair Finch. I imagined him sitting up a little straighter in his seat, his pen, which had been poised to write a death sentence, now frozen above his notepad. I wasn't just avoiding his criticism, I was challenging him. I was giving him the very thing he had just lamented was missing from the modern stage: authenticity. The Act 1 finale is a huge dramatic monologue. Agnes is rallying her clan, convincing them to go to war. Celeste played it as a shouting match, all volume and fury. It was exhausting to watch. But I remembered what Ewan had said. Truth is quiet. I started the speech softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The dialect forced a different rhythm, a different kind of power. It wasn't about shouting, it was about drawing people in, making them lean forward to catch every word. The power was in the precision, the weight of the ancient words, the conviction behind them. By the end of it, I was speaking with a voice that filled the entire theater. But it wasn't a yell, it was the sound of implacable will. As the lights crashed down to end the act, the applause was instantaneous. It wasn't the polite, scattered applause the show usually received. It was a roar, a wave of sound that hit me with physical force. The beast wasn't just intrigued anymore. It was mine. Standing there panting in the sudden darkness, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. This wasn't about Celeste. It wasn't about revenge. This was about the work. It was about the art. And for the first time in 6 months, the art was winning. The takeover was complete. The moment the lights went down for intermission, the backstage area, usually a place of calm, professional activity, erupted into a quiet chaos. The cast members who had been avoiding my gaze for months now rushed towards me, their faces a mixture of shock and exhilaration. That was incredible, Amara. Where did that come from? The lead actor, a veteran of the stage named Robert, who had always been civil but distant, grabbed my hands. His were trembling slightly. He just stared at me for a moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us our playback." That was when I knew the power had truly shifted. It wasn't just about the audience anymore. I had won over the company. They were artists, and they had been starved for a real partner on stage. Celeste had treated them like props in her star vehicle. I had treated them like collaborators. The energy was electric. It was the feeling of a team that had just against all odds pulled off a stunning victory. Then Julian, the director, was there. The panicked, sweaty man from my dressing room was gone. In his place was a man looking at me as if for the first time. His eyes were wide with a kind of awestruck reverence. "Amara," he breathed. My God, he was speechless. He who had condescended to me, who had taken Celeste's side at every turn, was now looking at me like I was a miracle. The fawning had begun. The producers, a pair of slick-looking men in expensive suits, who usually only spoke to Celeste, were suddenly by my side, patting my back, telling me how they always knew I had it in me. The hypocrisy was nauseating. But I just smiled and nodded. It wasn't personal. It was business. The asset they thought they had, Celeste, had defaulted. The asset they had ignored, me, had just seen its value skyrocket. They were simply recalculating their portfolio. Ben caught my eye from across the crowded wing space. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod and a small, genuine smile. It was the only validation that mattered. The second act was even better. Buoyed by the energy of the cast and the audience, I took more risks. I found moments of humor and tenderness in the character that had been buried under Celeste's one-note performance. The play became a living, breathing thing. When the final curtain fell, the applause was deafening. It was a standing ovation, not just from a few people, but from the entire house. As we took our bows, Robert pulled me to the front of the line, a place usually reserved for the star. The spotlight hit me, and the roar from the audience grew even louder. After the show, the backstage area was buzzing, but I was looking for one thing: Celeste's countermove. I knew it was coming. People like her don't just accept defeat. They try to rewrite the narrative. I found her cornering Julian by the prop table. Her migraine had miraculously vanished. She was dressed in street clothes, her face a mask of calculated concern. "I heard it went well," she was saying, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I'm so glad Amara could handle it. But Julian, darling, you have to understand. The stress of this production, it's been immense. I think, I think her ambition, her intensity, it created a very stressful environment for me. It triggered my condition. It was a masterful, desperate play. She was trying to frame my triumph as the cause of her illness. She was weaponizing my dedication, painting my competence as a form of aggression. She was trying to poison the well, one last time." But the power had shifted. Julian, who a few hours ago would have been lapping this up, now looked uncomfortable. He glanced over at me, then back at her. His sycophantic adoration had been replaced by a cool professional distance. "Celeste," he said, his voice flat, "I'm glad you're feeling better. We can talk to the producers tomorrow. Right now, I need to congratulate my cast." He turned and walked away from her, leaving her standing alone by a table of fake medieval goblets. Her face, for a split second, lost its carefully constructed mask. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted fury. She had played her last card, and it was a loser. The client exodus, in this world, wasn't about contracts and money. It was about loyalty and belief. And in the space of 2 hours, I had engineered a complete corporate takeover of both. The company, from the producers down to the stagehands, had transferred their allegiance to me. Not because I had schemed or politicked, but because I had delivered. I had proven my value in the only currency that ultimately matters in a theater, the quality of the work on stage. Celeste hadn't just lost the battle, she had lost the entire war. And the most beautiful part? She had handed me the gun and then run out of the room. Her desperate counterattack had failed because it was based on a lie, and everyone in the building had just witnessed the truth. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating incessantly on my nightstand. It was a flood of text messages, friends, old colleagues, even my agent, who had been lukewarm at best about my understudy gig. They were all sending me the same link. I sat up, my heart pounding. I knew what it was. I clicked the link. The review was from Alistair Finch. The headline was, "A star is born from a whisper in the thistle and the crown." My hands were shaking as I read it. He was a brilliant writer, and his praise was as eloquent as his criticism was brutal. He started by briefly, almost dismissively, mentioning that the advertised star had been absent. Then he dedicated the rest of the column to me. He wrote, "Last night, an audience that came to see a television celebrity was instead given a far rarer gift, a lesson in stagecraft. Amara, an actress I confess I was unfamiliar with, did not just play Lady Agnes, she resurrected her. The revelation was her voice. In an age of lazy, generic accents that insult both the playwright and the audience, Amara's work was a blast of cold, authentic North Sea air. Her Doric dialect was not a gimmick, it was the key that unlocked the character's soul, revealing a depth and complexity I had not thought the script possessed." He went on, but there was one line that made me gasp. One line that served as the final, perfect vindication. One leaves the theater wondering not just at the brilliance of this young actress, but at what the producers of this play have been hiding from their audiences for the past 6 months. One hopes, for the sake of the West End, that they do not make the same mistake again. He had done it. He hadn't just praised me, he had publicly questioned the judgment of everyone who had overlooked me. He had taken my quiet, secret work and broadcast its value to the entire world. It was a checkmate delivered by the most powerful player on the board. I walked to the theater that afternoon in a daze. My agent had already called. The producers wanted a meeting. There was talk of a new contract, not as an understudy, as the lead. When I arrived at the stage door, the atmosphere was completely different. The doorman, who usually just grunted at me, tipped his hat. "Brilliant show last night, miss." I went to my dressing room, the small, sad closet, to collect my things. As I was packing my bag, there was a knock on the door. It was Julian. Behind him was one of the producers. They looked like schoolboys summoned to the headmaster's office. "Amara," the producer began. We owe you an apology. We were blind. What you did last night was extraordinary. We would be honored if you would consider taking over the role of Lady Agnes for the remainder of the run, with a significant salary increase, of course, and your name above the title, alongside Robert's." I looked at their faces, at their sudden, desperate eagerness to please. It wasn't about revenge. I had to remind myself of that. It was about the work. I just nodded. I'd have my agent look over the contract. I said, my voice calm and professional. As they left, practically tripping over themselves with relief, I saw her, Celeste. She was coming out of her large star dressing room down the hall. Her personal assistant was behind her, carrying boxes. She was clearing out her things. Our eyes met across the corridor. The space was filled with the ghosts of 6 months of sabotage and humiliation. Her face was pale, stripped of its usual confident glow. The mask was gone. All that was left was the raw, bitter reality of her defeat. She walked towards me. I braced myself for a final, venomous tirade. But her fight was gone. She stopped a few feet away. "You got lucky," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That critic just happened to be there." I looked at her, at this woman who had tried to break me, who had built her career on a foundation of air, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not even pity, just a vast, empty distance. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "It wasn't luck. I worked. And then I turned, walked into my tiny dressing room, and closed the door, leaving her alone in the hallway with the ruins of her own making. The confrontation was over. There was no shouting, no dramatic showdown, just a quiet statement of fact. Her power had been built on noise. Mine had been built on silence. And in the end, silence had won. A week later, I stood in what was now my dressing room. It was the large one, the one with the sofa and the bright warm lights, the one that smelled of fresh flowers instead of dust and desperation. My name was on the door, painted in crisp gold letters. Amara. On the wall I had framed it. The Alistair Finch Review. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that quiet, dedicated work can eventually make the loudest noise of all. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The costume for Lady Agnes felt different now. It felt like my own skin. The journey had been a brutal one, a trial by fire, but standing here, in this room, with the sound of a full house waiting for me on the other side of the door, I knew it had all been worth it. It was never about revenge. It was about respect. Respect for the art, respect for the character, and finally, respect for myself. I had refused to let someone else's insecurity diminish my dedication. I had built a fortress of competence, brick by painstaking brick, and when the storm came, it was the only thing left standing. And that's the real moral of the story. For anyone out there right now who feels invisible, who is doing the work in the dark while someone else stands in the spotlight, for anyone who has been called difficult for having high standards or unprofessional for being more dedicated than the person in charge, your work matters. Your dedication is not a weakness, it is your superpower. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Keep building your secret weapon, whatever it is. A skill, a piece of knowledge, a network of allies who believe in the truth. Build it in silence and with integrity. Because you never know when the most influential critic in your world is going to show up, and you need to be ready. Your spotlight is coming. You just have to be prepared to step into it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to know that there are people out there who get it. If this resonated with you, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Leave a comment below sharing a time you felt your hard work was overlooked, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about quiet victories and loud vindication. It helps more than you know.